Today, we got a chance to talk to Michiel Boere from Remote. We heard about the journey of Remote, which I think is super interesting, especially in today's world of remote employment and how companies are growing, ultimately trying to hit every region of the world to find the best talent, and Remote's impact ultimately in helping companies achieve that journey. We had an opportunity to really talk about the impact of AI as well, how they're approaching AI from an HR technology point of view, how that correlates with what Kyriba ultimately is looking, how we're assessing and looking at AI more from a finance point of view. But not just that, but how are finance leaders assessing the value of AI as well? How can you properly calculate the ROI of investing in these types of technologies? We also talked a little bit about the back end cost of running AI as a technology provider and kind of that awareness that we're all going through, I would say, in the market. And lastly, we really covered off the global aspect of our joint businesses here, how that global footprint, even for a smaller company, comparative to the big conglomerates, how finance leaders have to navigate and how planning is a key aspect to that. But from a planning perspective, focusing on both the art and the science and not just getting stuck in the numbers, and how organizations can remain nimble by kind of getting outside of those numbers sometimes. So let's have a listen. And thanks again for Michiel for joining us on the session today. Welcome to Liquid, How CFOs Outperform. I'm your host, Tom Gavaghan, and today we get to speak to Michiel Boere, CFO at Remote. It's a company that's revolutionizing how businesses hire, how they pay, and manage talent across borders. Michiel has a front row seat to some of the most complex challenges facing global businesses today, from navigating foreign exchange volatility that can impact the bottom line to over a single weekend, to what's exciting for me, leveraging AI in ways that transform both HR as well as the office of the CFO. So, Michiel, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to the conversation here today. I guess before we get into some of the meat of the conversation on the finance side, would love to know a little bit more about your journey. You have an interesting background from McKinsey, I think working at Uber, and now into Remote. For our listeners who might not be familiar, can you start by explaining what Remote does and how you define your position as it sits today?
Sure, and thanks for having me on. I'm excited about this. Yeah, I joined Remote about 2.5 years ago, and Remote is a global HR platform. What we do is we help customers of all sizes to hire, manage, and pay people anywhere in the world. So whether they are an employee or a contractor, you can go on Remote and you can onboard your employees, you can pay them, and you can do more and more HR tasks on our platform, all in one place.
That's great. And from your background and your career journey, I think somewhat recently have joined Remote. How has that journey kind of led you to this position, kind of working from what I would call really big organizations, McKinsey and Uber, for example, to Remote, which is, kind of very, very much in a growth phase. Could you kind of help us in terms of that career journey?
Throughout my career, I've worked at very different places, to be honest. McKinsey is obviously a global consulting firm. I was there for a few times. And then I've also worked at smaller startups, Dutch startups, some that went well, some that went not so well. And most recently, before I joined Remote, I was at Uber for 7 years, which is a lifetime at Uber. And I did many, many different roles there. I did marketing, I did analytics, I then switched back to finance. And at the end, I was CFO of Uber Eats. I think one thing that has been consistent throughout my career, with the exception of McKinsey, is that most of the companies I worked with were high growth and were deeply unprofitable, at least when I joined them. So it's one thing I tried to change. When I left Uber, they were very profitable, and I'm trying to do the same thing now here at Remote.
Yeah, I think Remote's unique, obviously, based on the industry, the kind of working landscape that we are now in. Over the past 5 or so years specifically. But when we were talking, you were saying that Remote's goal is to really kind of target the middle of the spectrum. It's not so much like the mid-market per se, but the middle of the spectrum. Can you unpack what that means, why that positioning matters in today's market?
Yeah, sure. If you think about the life cycle of a company, when you start a company and you start off with just a founder or two founders, three founders, you start hiring your first employees usually around you. And then at some point when you get to 10 or 20 employees, you realize that you need a system to manage it. One place where you keep a record of everyone who works at your company, and where you can run payroll, and where you can store contracts, and eventually where you can run surveys, and where you can do performance management. So that's where we start. We can then essentially be your single source of truth for all your employee data, and you can do all of these things with us. And not just in your home country, because it's at some point when you grow as a company, you will likely at some point either open up offices elsewhere, and then you need payroll in multiple places around the world. And every country is different. Every country has their own rules, their own regulations. Or you will even want to search talent and want to hire people in places around the world where you are not even based. And then we can also help you as an employer of record. One thing that really excites me is that Remote is making it possible for people around the world to find meaningful opportunities, meaningful work, wherever they are based, whether they're in a small village in the countryside of England, or whether they live in a big city in South America. Wherever they are based, they can find meaningful work through us. And at the same time, we can help companies of all sizes, but really from a few dozen employees onwards to manage their employee base globally.
It resonates with me very much. Somebody who wants to work with the best person for the position, regardless of location. Obviously, I think, and since COVID, the world has adapted to being more remote, or at least tolerable of it. However, it's operational as well, where remote fits in, is being able to for the HR to operate and be able to support those types of hiring, not just the hiring, but the ongoing HR aspects of that. And I think there's an opportunity for AI's involvement there, as there is for pretty much anything these days. Can you help us understand a little bit of the approach and how Remote is looking at AI, first at the prospect from an HR perspective, and then we can kind of delve into the ties into finance, but be curious how Remote as a technology company at its core as well is kind of approaching AI.
With the rise of AI, one of the things we realized early on is that what matters very much is that you feed the AI the right data, the right regulations and the right rules. That is actually the core of what we do. We have operations in over 100 countries in the world, and we've built an enormous amount of knowledge and expertise on how you employ people around the world. It surprises me every day how difficult that is. Rules are completely different, even between different states in the US, or between different provinces in Pakistan, or between different areas in China. Like every country, every state, every province has their own rules, and feeding that data or feeding those rules into an AI is, I think, what's going to be very important, because only then the AI can help you and recommend you what to do. So that's what we are focused on, right? So essentially build that infrastructure on which we can then run our own artificial intelligence, and on which we can also allow customers to essentially find the right answer with their AI agents.
Yeah, and I think you could probably correlate that to finance and to treasury specifically. Every region has its own processes, its own policy, its own regulations. We're working to try to isolate or try to grow the use of artificial intelligence, not just at a top finance level, but being able to kind of localize it where it needs to be. I think that's what we're all looking to do, and trying to get into those nuances. As a CFO, when it comes to investments in AI, as your company is coming to you about CapEx and about furthering, invest in the product, growing the use of AI, as well as other parts of your operation that are probably looking for funding for AI-driven technologies. I think a lot of CFOs are probably going through that. Can you help us explain how should organizations, how should CFOs be looking at the ROI related to these types of investments? I would say both from, I think from what you're looking at, which is kind of a CapEx level type of, how you're producing this solution ultimately, but also the AI that you're using to power, I guess, the rest of the organizations and operations.
I would probably split it in two parts. On the one hand, we use a lot of software and tools that I think all companies are using, and all of those tools are now implementing their own AI feature or flavor, right? And it usually comes with an additional price. So there is definitely a challenge now, I think, among CFOs to keep their tools bill in check, right? It tends to only grow, and in the beginning, all of these add-ons are usually for free for a few months, and then when you're hooked, then that's when the price increases. On the cost side, I think it definitely is a challenge at the moment. We allow a lot of experimentation with that, but I do try to avoid us doing everything with every single tool. So I try to concentrate, or at least be flexible when we want to change. And then on the product side, that's where you have to take a little bit of a leap of faith nowadays as a CFO. There is an investment on producing your own AI products and your own features in your own products, but it's a little bit like you have to do it or somebody else will do it for you. So we have to take a bit of a leap of faith there, and we invest in it. Where I see the biggest gains at this point is simply in productivity, right? We see that the people that work at remote, with the use of AI, they can do their work way more efficiently. It really helps them with automating some of the standard processes.
Yeah. Do you think that it's that the broader kind of community here is growing in their understanding of AI as it relates to other types of software experiences? And what I mean by that is that comparatively to other technologies, there's obviously costs to run those things in terms of like storage and backup and processing and all of that other stuff. But AI has another layer there. And as a CFO, and from a remote perspective, you're looking at, when we invest in these types of things, here's what we can produce potentially in revenue side, but also here's the variable cost on the back end of that, the cost that we incur to run these. And the more complex, the more costly it is ultimately. How are you balancing that? Because I do think there is a bit of a misunderstanding, which is, well, why can't this should be like any other thing where we just amortize off the investment and off we go, happy days? It's like, no, the more it gets utilized, the more it's going to cost remote to run that AI potentially, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I woke up a few months ago as well to a pretty high usage bill of one of the big providers, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who had that experience. It's good if you run up against that, because then that is a bit of a reality check for people that these things do cost money, and you are going to have to optimize the product such that you use the right AI product for the right problem. Because there are also way cheaper AI solutions. Not everything needs a whatever the latest model of OpenAI is right now, right? So many AI, many problems can do with a much cheaper version, or your own wholly developed model yourself. We'll see a lot of optimization there. I do think there's many companies that will struggle in the AI space as the dust settles a little bit, and companies realize that there's cheaper ways to get to the same result.
One of those ways, whether it's cheap or not, and part of that ROI conversation that we hear, and I would love your take on it, is that AI potentially can replace roles in an organization. What's your view or a realistic expectation in relation to what AI can do in relation to the job of the CFO or within the office of the CFO?
Yeah, so if you look at the current capabilities of AI, you see it's very good with text and unstructured data. And it's not as good yet with really structured data or with numbers in general, right? We've seen AI features come into some of the financial tools that we all use, but it's not. I don't see that as widely used yet. Ironically, it's quite ironic, right? If you look back in time, we thought just 10 years ago, we thought that AI will first come after the hard math problems and only later on do social interactions. And it turns out that it's really the other way around. AI is first coming after the social interactions, and is acting like a coach, and is only later on, not yet even, beginning to help us with some of the number heavy tasks. I don't see that happen that much yet. What I do see is just a lot of productivity improvements. Mm-hmm. So I think we can grow our headcount less than we would have had we not had the benefit of these productivity tools.
Yeah, it's not about removing from the headcounts. It's about helping in the scaling of the headcounts moving forward. Is how I see it personally. It's not like right now, especially right now, that we can say that AI can replace anything, especially in finance and treasury. However, as you're looking at growing, and scaling HR from an HR perspective, you can look at AI as the sidekick to the rest of the organization and to the individuals within the organization to help grow it. Ultimately, I think I shared with you, we've been very active in our various user communities. Kind of a interesting time to have this dialogue because we've had a lot of Kyriba live events. We've had user communities recently and such. And so obviously we try to pull the audience. And I think I shared with you, we took a poll in one of our webinars, and 16% thought that the AI should be at the level of an experience and the ability to do the job of a CFO. We asked, what level? A CFO, group treasurer, cash manager, analyst, intern. And 16% were at the level of a CFO. If we were sitting in that room here today and having a dialogue, what would your point of view be? What would you share with that room where 16% perhaps think that the AI is going to do Michiel's current role?
I think that's a bit optimistic. Yeah. I don't want to underestimate the power of AI. It's not yet running a company, right? And maybe that's just behind the corner. Maybe one of the next models. It's very good at certain tasks and then not so great yet at other tasks. Mm-hmm. So if it's a CFO, it's a pretty unreliable CFO at the moment.
I would agree.
Right, and likely one, and it's likely going to be a CFO that is focused continuously on everything. And as CFO, you can't and you shouldn't do that. You need to pick your battles. You need to pick the 3, 4, 5 things that really matter, where you need to focus now. There's a lot of problems in a company where if I were an AI, I might approach it and add my opinion to it. But right now, I'm consciously not interfering with the problem-solving process in these areas.
Very fair, and you're in good company here. I share the same thought, and it's also where we're trying to orient, I would say, our user community as well as we're all learning. Yeah. Kind of the capabilities and setting right expectations based on what's accomplishable. So I think that's fair.
And Tom, I do think that AI will replace a lot of job categories, or will slowly replace a lot of job categories or job profiles. There's 2 types of views around that, right? So there's people who think that this will then lead to mass unemployment, and then there's others who think that with every technological advance, some jobs are going away and other jobs are created. I'm more in the second camp. I think we'll see a lot of job creation from AI, different types of jobs potentially. But
absolutely, I completely agree. You're already seeing a lot of it, I think, already. Let's shift to maybe more global kind of activities and things like that, because Remote, like Kyriba, it's a very international company. But I think with Remote, you said you have 100 different countries that you're operating in or have operated in thus far. Is that fair?
Yes, we operate in over 100 countries. We can pay workers in even more countries, almost every country around the world. We can pay people, and we have ourselves operations in more than 100 countries, and it's wild, to be honest. That's probably the right word. We've built that up over the course of 5 years. So we've essentially built a multinational in 5 years. With all the complexity that comes with that. So hundreds of bank accounts, hundreds of legal entities, many audits that I run every time, We've got a complex organization on the back end that we try to abstract away as much as possible for our customers.
It's really impressive, especially like you said, in such a kind of quick amount of time. Can relate on our end. We have 100 customers, or we have users that are logging in from 100 different countries ourselves. So there's probably a lot of overlap there. For the audience, though, and from your point of view, having to manage this and continue to grow it, what is the biggest financial complexities that most people don't realize, perhaps, when it comes to having that type of a global footprint?
So I think from a financial point, the complexity with that global footprint lies at least to a large extent in the money movement, right? It's much more complex than generally people think to move money around the world if it's not going to the top countries in the world, right? Like it's very easy to move money from, say, Europe to the US and back and forth, but to get the funds right in time for payroll to the Philippines or Pakistan is a different story. And there's a lot of time and effort that goes into managing that complexity, managing these flow of funds, managing the bank accounts, managing the foreign exchange exposure, which is very large. So that complexity is certainly one of it. And probably the other financial complexity is that you're going to have to become a tax expert and an accounting expert in all of these countries. For anyone who's done VAT in Nigeria and corporate income tax in Vietnam, like those things are difficult, and not always in English, or more often than not, they're that's where AI definitely helps us.
Yeah, that's not the fun part for sure, but obviously crucial to the operation you have there, the business that you're running. On the FX side, if we dig into that a little bit, like you said, obviously with your company and where you're located and the growth you've had and where you're functional, there inherently comes FX risk management needs, I would say. I think from our point of view, FX risk management and the function therein and the technologies thereafter really was something that was kind of done by the big companies for a long time. But obviously now in the world we work within, a 5-year-old effectively, company now is sitting on significant risk when it comes to FX. So can you share with, those that are listening that are within that kind of have that view, how do you bring in that function to a smaller company comparative to, say, like an Uber, where I would assume there was more of a formalized FX risk management practice and some tenure and maturity there? How do you bring that down into a company like Remote or any other sort of like growth, small, medium entity, for example?
This is probably one area of finance that I really underestimated when I joined Remote. In fact, for the first couple of months here, I had maybe the naive opinion that we were so diversified that it would all average out over time. And at some point, the dollar crashed. I think it was early this year. Crash is maybe not the right word, but it depreciated very quickly, and we got burned once or twice. And that's when we realized, no, this is not going to average out. We really need to do something about it. So we've started up a little bit of a project to manage that. My advice to other CFOs would be spend first some time really trying to understand your exposure. Your exposure is not always obvious, and it requires a really good understanding of that before you start hedging. And then once you start hedging, the hedging itself is easy. It's not that difficult. There's simple products, some complex products. We started with simple products. I'm happy with that. Understanding the exposure was the most complex part of our journey.
Yeah, it's what we hear typically as well. The execution is like you said, it's the trivial part of it. It's like the beginning and the end where there's the complexity. The beginning being getting a hold of your exposures, the end being accounting treatment and all of that fun stuff that comes along with it. With Remote, where companies might have more, where it might be more challenging for that exposure level is, the bigger they are and they've gone through acquisition. So they have a lot of information, exposure information, perhaps sitting in different locations of their organization. How did you approach it on your end in terms of, getting access to that information from your core financials, ensuring that you're, not missing any blind spots in certain regions that might be sitting, some information might be sitting on a spreadsheet, perhaps randomly for that region. I mean, what was your practice there? How did you get the right stakeholders involved and so on?
We realized pretty quickly that we were not going to get the answer out of our accounting systems. So we started a little bit blank slate from a first principles perspective to try to understand where does the exposure lies for us, and the exposure for remote is mostly because we employ people everywhere around the world. We pay them in a certain currency, not always the currency of that country where they're employed, but we pay them in a certain currency, and then our customers pay us in a different currency. And then when our customers pay us is somewhat predictable, but not completely certain. And when we pay out the employees is very predictable, and we cannot miss a beat there.
Yeah, very
right?
certain.
We have to make payroll.
Yeah.
So it means that whatever happens, we have to move the funds into, let's pick a country, into South Africa at the right time, onto our South African bank account, and make sure we can pay our employees in South Africa in rand, in this case, or in USD if they've chosen to do so, on time, right? And we cannot miss that. So we have to start from looking at the exposure of which customers are paying us in which currencies, at what times, and at what time of the month do we need to pay or actually fund entities all around the world. And once you start putting that in a spreadsheet, you get a 100 by 100 matrix. It gets pretty complex pretty quickly, but you can start with the big flows and analyze them.
Yeah.
And we realized that not all of this was in an accounting system. So we started doing this really from a first principles perspective, just thinking about like, how does our exposure work and how should we go about calculating that?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's not just about the accounting system. It's other parts of the organization that are impacting those exposures that need to be considered as you're kind of aggregating that. I think it ties into like planning, which obviously is a big focal point always, right? Over the past at least 10 years, it's always been kind of a top topic of conversation with CFOs. We don't need to get into the political landscape, but obviously that goes to what you're talking about, dragging currencies up and down over, especially as of recent. But how do you build resilience into your financial planning, especially when operating in all these different locations that are having that impact that is occurring from macroeconomic impacts and geopolitical issues that are happening? I mean, how do you build that resilience into the planning that is effectively going to impact your FX hedging as well?
Yeah. So ultimately, Remote is an American company, right? We have an American topco at the top. So ultimately, we are exposed to the dollar, right? Dollar is eventually the currency in which we report to investors. So there's nothing we can do about that, right? Like we can't hedge every single risk out of that. So we will be exposed to how the dollar moves. Sometimes in our advantage, sometimes not. We have to stay flexible in where we hire people. We have to stay flexible in how fast we grow. Fortunately, we have a very good banking relationship with multiple banks, so we're pretty flexible there. So, for example, when the SVB issue unfolded, this was before I joined, but we were able to still make payroll everywhere, even though some of our customers were not able to pay us at the time.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Still raw, the SVB incident, in something like anything that's happened to us in the finance world, it'll last, and we'll always think back to that and use that as an anecdote and learning experience. I'd say for the next event, whenever that one comes down the pike. And also when it comes to planning, a big discussion point as well is scenario planning. What if this and what happens if this were to occur? What's your approach on planning and the scenario aspect of the planning, especially again needing to cater or factor in certain regional scenarios perhaps, and how that will impact and roll up to the parent entity, for example? What's your approach there, and how are you trying to be nimble with it?
Nimbleness, I certainly learned that over time. So if we go back to the beginning of the pandemic, I remember that I was at Uber, and this was probably in March 2020. And the pandemic started to hit, and we would make a projection every day of how we thought that this was going to impact the Uber's ride-sharing business, right? So on Monday we would make a graph that said, we're going to go down 20% in our business, and it's going to last for 3 weeks. And maybe we'll make a worst case scenario, which is we go down 30% and it lasts for 3 months. So that was the scenario on Monday, and the worst case scenario on Monday. And then 2 days later on Wednesday, we came together again and we did this picture again. And now the worst case scenario of 2 days ago was the mid case scenario of today. And we made another worst case scenario that went 50% down for 6 months. And then we got back on Friday, 2 days later, and now that was the scenario that was most likely. And this went on for 2 weeks, and we realized like nobody knows how long this is going to go for. Nobody knows how deep this is going to go for. So that certainly was a lesson in how wrong you can be in your scenarios, and how you can miss things that look like there are black swans. Like some black swan will happen, right? So it was definitely humbling. And what it means now is that I think it's very important that you stay super flexible, that you react very fast to incidents when they come about. That also you don't spend too much time planning far ahead, because it's usually outdated by the time you've finished the plan. So my team, or I try to make sure that my team does not spend too much time on planning and budgeting. I do try to make sure that my team really understands the business well, and that they're able to understand the decision points. What are the things that we can do if a certain thing happens? If it goes well, if it goes not so well, what can we do? What are the levers that we can steer, so to speak?
I think it's a reoccurring theme, actually. There's different schools of thought in terms of how to operate the finance function, right? Some might say, no, I believe and I want to emphasize planning and budgeting more, and I'd rather my team spend more of their time doing that. One thing that I think is present in all the strong CFOs that we've gotten a chance to work with and interact with is making sure that the organization understands the business, to your point, that they're not just living in a spreadsheet and looking at numbers without knowing where those numbers are coming from and how they come into the business, and where the numbers are going to and how those operate and impact the business. So making sure that you're tying into the company, I think, is a great piece of advice in terms of actual scenario planning, to your point, because you could sit here and create mathematical formulas all day and cool tools to say, okay, up, down, what if that. But really, one of the most powerful things is truly understanding this revenue generating part of our business. If we were to invest more in that, what could that yield? Because here's why that would occur. I think that that's obviously a really strong and impactful kind of message, I would say.
Yeah. And fast decision making, right? Fast decision making is needed.
And I think that comes with the integration with the rest of the business as well. If you are a disconnected CFO and you need to act fast, it's going to be hard for you to be trusted and be a part of that execution and that decision that ultimately happens. I mean, at the end of the day, we are still being run by humans, and humans have to trust humans, and we need to work cohesively together. Again, if I don't hear from you for months on end, and then all of a sudden you come chasing me because you want to drive more revenue into the business or cut costs because we need to hit a certain number, I might not trust you because I don't have that tie to you, perhaps, or know exactly where you're coming from because you don't know where I'm coming from. So I think that's also a part of it as well. Human to human.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little more about the role of the CFO, about, I guess, a little bit more about you and your journey. You've been in the role now coming in at 3 years or so, 2.5 at Remote, even in that short amount of time, because I don't even think that's that short, actually. How has the role evolved for you, the role of the CFO while being at Remote, especially, I think, because Remote has been changing and growing so much so quickly?
2.5 years ago, we were at a different size even, right? We were an order of magnitude smaller than we are today. I focused on different things back then. I focused more on making sure that our cash management was in order, making sure that our collection process was there, making sure that we really understood the risks that we were facing as a business, and making sure that we were, not just me, but the whole management team, to make sure that we were planting the right seeds for future growth. And over time, I think what's changed mostly is just the topics that you focus on. So I focused more on our tax structure, and I focused more on, say, our pricing strategy and our operational efficiency. So things like that have evolved. But we have a very strong team now. We have a very strong finance team, a stable finance team. So I'm very happy with that. Well positioned, I think, to manage the complexity that I mentioned earlier in a structural way.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like over that journey so far, it's bringing in probably that prior experience and inserting some of that maturity into the overall operation itself to both help ensure that you're scaling at the top line, optimizing the bottom line. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. And you have to be, for fast-growing companies, you have to be comfortable as a CFO to not have all your ducks in a row, right? And to not have everything at the same time, not have all your audits completed on time, not have perfect insight in the profitability of new products. You have to, pick the topics that you really want to dive into. You have to be okay with letting some others, simmer for a while until you have the time to look into those.
It makes perfect sense. It speaks to making sure the alignment is there, I guess. So tell me a little more about how do you work with your CEO? How do you work with the other kind of parallel executives on balancing that growth investment that you need to do against profitability challenges thereafter, especially again with trying to navigate through a lot of uncertainty in the market?
Yeah, pretty close executive team. And I work very much, especially with our chief people officer and our chief legal officer and our chief operating officer to run all the processes in the company to make sure the revenue flows all the way through, manage risks, right? So that we also have a structure in the team where we can all make decisions, even if it concerns each other's areas. So I'm perfectly fine for others in the team and for everyone in my team to make financial decisions. Have questions, they can of course ask me what my opinion is, but I like it if other people also are showing business judgment and making decisions fast. The whole saying, "Don't ask for permission,
ask for forgiveness."
Ask for forgiveness. Yeah, it's gotten a bad rap. I think that saying has gotten a bad rap after Facebook. But it is true in some sense, because otherwise you get a very bureaucratic organization with a lot of red tape where everything has to go up the chain for approval. Yeah. So that's something we do try to avoid.
I'm a big believer in that saying, and I think you can. It's justified in any organization. It's just at different levels. You don't ask for forgiveness at necessarily a CEO level, for example, but you foster it, further down in the organization for sure. And that allows you to kind of grow and be, and ultimately be nimble, which we talked about as well. And especially with so much changing going on a number of different fronts, I think it's absolutely necessary, actually. From your experience coming from McKinsey, coming from Uber, for example, or really anywhere else, like what would you say is a secret weapon that you have that you've brought to Remote, that you've brought to your team, for example, from those experiences?
I'm not sure if there's a secret weapon. One thing I've tried to bring with me from my previous roles is to search for the one or two things that really matter, that really describe how the business is doing, and therefore are the ones that you should focus on. I was at Uber. We would make a picture of our unit economics. I can still draw it even when I'm asleep. Draw a picture of our unit economics, and that's what we would focus on. And that was just one picture that told the entire story of how our entire portfolio of all countries was doing. And spending a lot of time on that one view that tells it all, I think a few times in my life, and proven very, very helpful.
we can get distracted by the margins, by the edge cases, and that can suck up a lot of resources. But you have to anchor yourself and come back to what's most important and what drives the business ultimately. I think any leader can relate probably to that, and kind of, I would say that's a secret weapon,
Yeah.
because that is something that you sometimes can easily forget, because it's very easy to get distracted by the 20% when you really should just be making sure that you're focusing on the 80.
Yeah, and I'm personally a very visual person, so I try to make a graph. Sometimes my team mad because I try to make a graph of whatever whatever the problem is. I try to make a chart out of it.
I think most of us do as well. Speaking of your team, what's your school of thought in terms of motivating them and keeping them motivated, charged, moving towards the goals that you guys have? I think, like most CFOs, I'm sure you don't have this massive, amount of team. You're running an optimal organization, I'm sure, right? And your team's probably working tirelessly and works hard and so on. So how do you keep them motivated and going towards that vision and goal of remote?
Yeah, our team works super hard because we have a pretty big finance team, but we also have, like I mentioned, a ton of complexity that we need to run. Try to do with the team is to make sure that everyone understands the bigger picture and steps out of their day-to-day activities and takes a look at what is it that we're doing, what is the 5-year journey that we're on, we come from, where are we going, and why is that so exciting, right? Sometimes it's easy to get lost in the fact that you have to finish the VAT for Canada, right? Sometimes you need to take a step back and realize that we are transforming the way that HR is done globally, right? And we are transforming the way that companies are hiring people and are paying people around the world, and the economic opportunities that unlocks for people everywhere, but also the efficiency that it unlocks for businesses to grow and to manage all of their HR needs in one platform. Once people get excited about that and about where we're going as a company, I think that's very important. And that's also my role as a leader of the finance team, to make that picture clear.
It's awesome. I think it's highly transformative, very exciting to see what remote is doing. I think it's such an interesting time and optimally timed ultimately for what remote is doing and the timing they had coming into the market there. Last thing, we always usually talk about something with our whoever's on the show, talk about what they're reading, what they're interested in these days, and I would love to hear from you. I think you have an interesting book that you were talking about before, you and I.
Yeah, we talked about this book from Nate Silver behind 538.com, the website I would say that predicted some of the elections in the US. A decade ago, and he wrote a book called The Signal and the Noise, which is a book I really liked and I recommend. And now he has actually a new book called, I think it's called On the Edge, that I'm trying to read, but I haven't found the time yet. So that's what I'm going to do next.
I know Nate Silver, don't know the book, but when I was reading about it after you and I had chatted originally, it's about finding like those false flags, right? Like by kind of disproving that the norms and the trends that we're all used to, how they can be wrong. And I think now more than ever, because you said it about 20 minutes ago, I think, right? We can spend too much time analyzing things, actually. And you need to kind of stop, slow down, zoom out, perhaps, and kind of look at everything, not just the data, perhaps.
Yeah. And statistics is fascinating, and many people have, including myself, sometimes fall into the classic statistical traps, right? So that's what I now try to avoid.
Yeah, you got to keep a balance, and those things are good, and they're super important, and they help you keep a direction, but you still have to factor in other types of non-mathematical variables, I think, ultimately. So I seriously look forward to that one and getting up to speed on that book, because I think it will tug at my heartstrings of pragmatism, I think, and not becoming just so inundated with the data. I mean, I think it's probably the typical thing, right? As we always say, paralysis by analysis. I think sometimes, especially in finance, we sometimes find ourselves doing that.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Michiel, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed having our conversation here. Thank you so much for joining us here today. It was great to learn about remote. I think that's super interesting what you guys are doing there, and again, highly transformative. It'll be cool to kind of watch how your company there is evolving over the years to come. Any last parting thoughts? How can the audience, if they're listening, catch up with you or keep up with you or with Remote?
Well, with Remote, they can obviously do a demo or look at our new products. We have just launched AI surveys, which is a great product that lets you create surveys and run them in no time. And we've also launched a recruit product. So we have some great products that you can find on our website.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you again, Michiel. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. To never miss an episode, subscribe wherever you listen. And I'm Tom Gavaghan, and this is Liquid, how CFOs outperform.